Are you ready to challenge everything you think you know about Wall Street and the housing market? By the end of this video, you'll have the facts to win any argument about what's really driving up home prices. And trust me, it's not what you've been told by the special interest groups pushing their own agendas. Let's start with a bombshell today. Less than 0.5% of single-family homes in the U.S. are owned by institutional investors. That's right, Wall Street isn't gobbling up neighborhoods like you might have heard. But if that's true, why are home prices skyrocketing? Why are affordable rentals getting harder to find? These are the questions at the heart of one of the hottest debates in real estate right now. Everyone's pointing fingers, but few people have the real story. By the time we're done here, you'll understand what's actually happening in the housing market, and you'll be able to set the record straight with anyone who tries to tell you otherwise. Now, I know what you're thinking. If Wall Street isn't the bad guy here, who is? Well, it's complicated, and it all goes back to 2008. Remember the financial crisis? Of course you do. It was a turning point for the entire housing market, and it set the stage for everything we're seeing today. But here's the thing. The story didn't play out the way most people think it did. Wall Street's role in the housing market isn't what you've been led to believe. And the real culprit behind rising home prices and rents? It might surprise you. Throughout this video, we're going to connect the dots between the 2008 crash and today's housing challenges. We'll look at the hard data, bust some common myths, and give a clear picture of what's really going on in your neighborhood and across the country. So, if you've been frustrated by rising home prices, if you're a renter struggling to find an affordable place to live, or you're just trying to make sense of all the conflicting information out there about the housing market, stick around. By the end of this video, you'll have the knowledge you need to understand the real issues and even take action in your own community. Are you ready to dive into the shocking truth about Wall Street and your home? Let's get started. If you've been following me for a while, you know I often analyze and discuss current housing market data because so many videos on YouTube are made by fearmongers seeking clicks with topics about foreclosures and home prices crashing, even when we're facing soaring home prices and crashing home affordability. If you're not a subscriber, please click the thumbs up like button and subscribe now to get all my new content when it is fresh. If you really want to know what's going on in housing, to see and hear the data explained, to learn the tips and tricks that put extra money in your pocket, then subscribe now and I'll keep you in the know. Picture this. It's 2008 and the housing market is in shambles. Foreclosure signs are popping up like weeds in neighborhoods across America. Home construction has ground to a halt and distressed properties are everywhere. This was the aftermath of the financial crisis, and it set the stage for a major shift in the housing market. You might think this is when Wall Street swooped in and bought up everything in sight, but the reality is a bit more complicated. Yes, institutional investors did see an opportunity in the chaos, but their involvement wasn't as widespread as you might believe. Here's what really happened. As foreclosures flooded the market, the federal government found itself with a massive inventory of repossessed homes. Instead of selling these properties to individual buyers, they often offloaded them to large investors. This decision opened the door for Wall Street firms to enter the single-family home market in a big way. Now, you're probably thinking, aha, so Wall Street did take over our neighborhoods. But hold on, let's look at the numbers, because they tell a different story. Today, institutional investors own only about 3% of single-family rentals. That's right, just 3%. On the other hand, small landlords, your neighbors, local real estate investors, and mom and pop operations own a whopping 80% of single-family rentals. This data might surprise you, especially if you've heard all the buzz about Wall Street buying up America's homes. But if Wall Street isn't dominating the market, why do we hear so much about it? Well, in some areas, their presence is more concentrated. Take Charlotte, North Carolina, for example. There, institutional investors own about 20% of single-family rentals. That's a significant chunk, and it can certainly impact the local market. Senator Jeff Merkley put it this way: "You've created a situation where ordinary Americans aren't bidding against other families. They're bidding against the billionaires of America for these houses." While this statement captures the frustration many feel, it's important to remember that it doesn't reflect the reality in most markets across the country. Since 2008, Wall Street's involvement in housing has evolved. They're not just buying distressed properties anymore. Some firms have developed sophisticated algorithms to identify undervalued homes and purchase them before they even hit the market. Others have created new financial products based on bundles of single-family rentals. But here's the kicker. Despite all this activity, Big investors still play a limited role in the overall housing market. Remember that stat from earlier? Less than 0.5% of single-family homes in the U.S. are owned by institutional investors. That's a tiny fraction of the total market. So if Wall Street isn't the main driver of today's housing challenges, what is? The answer might surprise you. It has everything to do with what happened, or rather, what didn't happen after 2008. You see, when the housing market crashed, new home construction came to a screeching halt. And here's the thing, it never really picked back up to pre-crisis levels. This lack of new construction has had far-reaching effects on the housing market, affecting both home prices and rental availability. But wait, there's more to this story. The 2008 crash didn't just impact construction, it also changed how banks lend money for mortgages. After the crisis, getting a home loan became much harder, especially for people with less than perfect credit scores. This shift had a huge impact on who can buy homes and who's forced to rent. You might think Wall Street is to blame for your rising rent, but here's the shocking truth. It's not the big investors that are causing your housing woes. The real culprit behind skyrocketing rents and home prices is something much closer to home, a severe shortage of housing supply. Let's look at some eye-opening statistics. Did you know that fewer single-family homes were built in the 2010s than in any decade since the 1960s? That's right. Despite our growing population, we're building fewer homes than we did half a century ago. This shortage isn't just affecting home buyers, it's putting immense pressure on the rental market too. Think about it. When there aren't enough homes to buy, more people are forced to rent. And when there aren't enough rentals to go around, landlords can charge higher prices. It's simple supply and demand. But the problem goes deeper than just not building enough houses. After the 2008 financial crisis, banks tightened their lending standards significantly. Today, it's much harder for people with credit scores below 620 to get a mortgage. That's shutting out a large portion of potential home buyers, keeping them in the rental market and driving up demand even further. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about all those corporate investors buying up homes? Surely they're making things worse. Well, the data tells a different story. Remember, institutional investors own less than half of 1% of single-family homes in the U.S. That's a drop in the bucket compared to the overall housing market. To find the real culprit, you need to focus on the other 99.5% of the market. In fact, some argue that these investors are actually providing a necessary service. They're often buying older homes, renovating them, and then renting them out. In a market where many people can't afford to buy, these renovated rentals provide another housing option. But here's where things get really interesting. Some politicians are proposing legislation to ban corporate ownership of homes. They think this will solve the housing crisis. But let's think about the unintended consequences of such a move. If we ban corporate ownership, we're not just affecting the 0.5% of homes owned by big investors, we're also impacting many small landlords who incorporate the rental properties for legal and tax purposes. These small landlords own about 80% of single-family rentals. Forcing them to sell could actually reduce the number of available rentals, making the rental housing shortage even worse. Moreover, those renovated homes I mentioned earlier, many of them might not get fixed up without corporate investment. Individual buyers often don't have the capital to take on major renovations, especially in a tight credit market. So if banning corporate ownership isn't the answer, what is? Well, that's the million-dollar question, or should I say the multi-trillion-dollar question, given the size of the U.S. housing market. The real solution is much more straightforward, but it's not easy. We need to build more houses. A lot more houses. We need to return to the construction levels we saw in previous decades, and then some to make up for lost time. But why aren't we building more? That's a complex issue involving zoning laws, construction costs, labor shortages, and more. And it's something we'll dive into in the next section of this video. What if I told you that kicking out Wall Street isn't the answer to the housing crisis? You might be surprised to learn that there's a political narrative pushing the anti-Wall Street agenda because it's easy to gain followers by getting people riled up against big business. But the real solution to our housing problem isn't about pointing fingers. It's about dramatically increasing the housing supply. Let's talk about why building more houses is the key to solving our housing crisis. When we increase the supply of homes, we directly address the root cause of rising prices and limited availability. It's basic economics. More supply means lower prices and more options for buyers and renters alike. Take a look at cities that have successfully increased their housing supply. In Tokyo, for example, they managed to keep housing costs relatively stable despite a growing population. How? By allowing dense, multifamily housing construction and streamlining the approval process for new builds. The result? More affordable housing options for everyone. Another success story is Minneapolis. In 2018, they became the first major U.S. city to end single-family zoning. This bold move allowed for more duplexes and triplexes to be built around in areas previously restricted to single-family homes. The result? More housing options and improved affordability. Now, you might be wondering why we aren't building more houses everywhere if it's such a clear solution. Well, that's where zoning laws and other regulations come into play. Many of our cities have outdated zoning laws that severely limit new construction, especially in desirable areas. For example, in some neighborhoods, it's illegal to build anything other than single-family homes on large lots. This might have made sense 50 years ago, but it's creating serious problems in our growing cities today. These restrictive zoning laws are a big reason why we're not building enough homes to meet demand. But here's the good news. This is where you can make a real difference in your community. Zoning laws are typically set at the local level, which means your voice matters. By getting involved in local politics and advocating for zoning reform, you can help increase housing supply in your area. What does zoning reform look like? It could mean allowing more multifamily housing, reducing minimum lot sizes, or permitting accessory dwelling units like granny flats or garage apartments. These changes can significantly impact housing supply without drastically changing the character of a neighborhood. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Not in my backyard. This attitude, often called NIMBYism, is a major obstacle to increasing housing supply. But here's the thing. We all need to understand the impact of fighting against new home development. When we block new housing, we're not just preserving our neighborhoods, we're driving up costs for everyone and pushing people out of our communities. Consider this. Every time a new apartment building is blocked, dozens of families lose out on potential homes. Every time a subdivision is downsized, fewer people get the chance to live in your community. This is why prices and rents are skyrocketing. It's time we start thinking about the broader impact of our housing decisions. If we keep driving home prices higher, eventually only corporations will be able to afford them. So, what can you do? Start by educating yourself about local zoning laws and upcoming development projects. Attend city council meetings and planning commission hearings. Voice your support for sensible increases in housing density. And most importantly, talk to your neighbors about the benefits of increasing the housing supply. Remember, supporting new housing development doesn't mean turning your quiet suburb into Manhattan overnight. It's about making smart, incremental changes that allow for more housing options. This could mean supporting a small apartment building on a commercial street or allowing homeowners to add an additional dwelling unit to their property. By getting involved in these local efforts, you're not just helping to solve the housing crisis, you're shaping the future of your community. You're ensuring that your children and grandchildren will be able to afford to live in the neighborhoods they grew up in. You're creating opportunities for young families, retirees, and everyone in between to find housing that meets their needs. So, let's recap what we've learned. Wall Street isn't the housing market villain you might have thought. The real issue? We're just not building enough homes. This shortage is driving up prices and making it harder for everyone to find affordable housing. But here's the good news. You can make a difference. Supporting housing development in your area is the most effective way to address affordability issues. Get involved in local politics, advocate for zoning reform, and educate your neighbors about the benefits of increasing the housing supply. For a current overview of the housing market, check out my recent update using Zillow market data. It's factual, timely, and definitely worth a few minutes of your time.